Welcome to the Beast, my friends. Today I have my colleagues Ed William and Dylan O'Sullivan joining me from across the Atlantic to discuss Sicario. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Good to be here.
Pleasure.
That was the scariest intro to a podcast I've ever heard.
Setting the tone right away. So I think we're just going to do a quick intro about the film and our background with it. And then let's do the spoiler horn and go into dig deep, right? My kind of context here is I'm a huge Denis Villeneuve fan, not just because he's from the same corner of the world as me and he has a similar accent, but I think he's one of the best and most talented directors working today. And his films really resonate with me. So I think this was my fourth time seeing Sicario. To me, good films are like good books or good albums, right? They can be rewatched because they have all these layers and you see different things every time. To me, this is one of those. The quick info on the films, right? For someone who hasn't seen it, it's directed by Denis Villeneuve. It's written by Taylor Sheridan. It was part of his Frontier trilogy with Wind River and Hell or High Water. And I think I would rank them as for me, Sicario number 1, Wind River number 2, and Hell or High Water number 3. Music is by Johan Johansson from Iceland, who sadly died in 2018 at the age of 48 from, I think, an overdose, which is very, very sad.
I'd forgotten he died until doing the prep for this episode. He was only 48.
I'm finding out right now. Literally listening to him yesterday.
Sorry to give you the bad news. Yeah, he was extremely talented.
Yeah.
The film is shot by Roger Deakins, one of my favorite cinematographers. So many frames from a variety of his films I could put up on my walls and look at them forever. I think he's amazing. Emily Blunt is in this. I loved her in this, and I think she's great also in Edge of Tomorrow, another underrated film, kind of a hybrid between Groundhog Day and Starship Troopers. Josh Brolin, Benicio del Toro. I think that's the high-level stuff. But I'm curious, guys, how many times have you seen this? Are you huge fans, or are you coming to it fresh? I'm curious.
I think this is my second time watching it. I started watching it, I don't think I've actually seen this, even though I thought I had. I said, I don't think I've actually seen this before. And I was like, oh, maybe this is Traffic with Del Toro as well, which is also kind of cartel-based. And then about a third of the way through, I was like, actually, no, I have seen this. But it's in college, we watched movies pretty much every night in various states of compos mentis. So some of them are more hazy than others. But then I was like, oh yeah, definitely. It clicked about halfway through. I'm not I love all Villeneuve's movies. He's not I don't check what's coming out next for him. So he's not like a director I follow that way. But it's been a one-to-one correlation with I like everything that he's done that I've seen.
So I think this is my fourth or my fifth time seeing the film, but my origin story with it is pretty similar to yours, Dylan, in that I remember the first time I saw it, the film came out in 2015, so I think it must have been 2016. And I was in a student flat with my two best mates, who actually are going to be my best men this year at my wedding. But and it was a proper student flat where we had a sort of a pretty small TV wall mounted on the wall, which I always had Rick and Morty or something on. And then we had another TV set up in front of it where we play FIFA. And then we'd usually have the football on and an iPad, and there'd all be beers on the go and people coming and going. It was that sort of student house. So I remember the first time I saw it, someone obviously had got it on DVD and it was playing on the TV, but we weren't really watching it. It was just on in the background, just chilling. And then I think it was the beast scene was Jesus Christ, what the fuck is this? This is amazing. And then so watched that and was like, wow. And then we got distracted again, and then it got to the tunnel scene, and again it was wow, what is this? So then we got to the end of the film, we're we need to properly watch this film. So then we watched it beginning to end in silence the next day, and we're yeah, okay, this is an incredible film. And then I've watched it a couple of times since then. Villeneuve's definitely my favourite blockbuster director. His films are made to be seen, they're big movies with big ideas on the big screen, and even if that's not your favourite type of film, it's an important corner of filmmaking, and he's the very pinnacle of that, I reckon.
Wow, this is such a late millennial, early Gen Z story of 4 screens on at the same time, and it's mixed attention.
Yeah, it's it sounds a bit like a hellscape to some people, but it was fun.
I'm gonna crank up the spoiler horn and then let's dig in. Right from the intro of the film, right? Because I hadn't seen it in a few years, so you remember a lot of the big beats and the big scenes, but now I was trying really to pay attention to the details, and even from the first frames, I think Roger and Denis, they really understand contrast, right? The wild landscape and the desert, the houses, and then start seeing those black figures walking around, and you know that, okay, it's SWAT teams, and then it pans around to sniper position, and I just love how it's shot. It could almost be a Western at first, it's super widescreen, the desert and everything, but right away, right? They know how to build tension. The music, the heartbeat, and everything kind of builds up right away to this raid, this burst of violence, basically. The way I look at it, they wanted to show you right away, anything could happen in this film very quickly. It's not a film where violence is like elongated and like try to make it look cool, a firefight that lasts for 10 minutes, room by room, right? It's more like something happens and either you're dead or you kill the other, but it's like very, very quick. I'm curious what you think of that early raid scene.
Yeah, for me, it was like, because again, I really wasn't sure if I'd seen it when I was coming in, and it was just all the color immediately. Just again, as you say, but that kind of black on yellow, there's nothing else to look at. So your eyes aren't darting left or right. You're just kind of slightly leaning forward. And then I think there's like the first other color, then is like, they turns the corner, red curtain, boom, blood on the wall. There's like layers and layers adding to the action as well. Just that attention to detail that grabbed me straight away.
Yeah, as you both said, in terms of tone setting, it's like that is the film right there in terms of the atmosphere and the dread. It's quite interesting. I was listening to a podcast with, I think it was with Roger Deakins to prep for this, and he said that it was quite a tight budget, so nearly everything they shot they used. They didn't do much coverage and they didn't have many scenes that they cut or anything like that. But apparently one of the only things they did cut was they filmed a different opening with Benicio del Toro's character. Apparently it was like a scene on a beach or something. Apparently it was like a really good scene, and Roger Deakins was like, oh, it's one of the best things I've shot. Like, I'm gutted they didn't use it. He said they chose not to use it because they were like, well, we need to open with this as Emily Blunt's character story, not his story. He needs to come in more mysteriously later in the film. So I think that was the right call, but I just thought that was quite interesting. I'd like to see that cutscene.
I also heard that, and I think it makes sense. I think the whole film is kind of a subversion of the thriller generally, right? You think this is Kate's story, but really, we'll talk about it later, but in the tunnel scene, like, the perspective changes, and now you realize it's really Alejandro's stories. Kate is not a normal protagonist because she doesn't have much influence on what's going on. She's kind of a witness, right? She's just kind of being dragged along, and she has no idea what's going on for most of the film, and so we don't have any idea the first time we see it, which is why it's such a good rewatch, right? Because the second time you see everything very differently. But the first time I remember being so lost, and it makes sense because she doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah. Do you think that was supposed to be her first kill when she shoots the guy in the house?
I don't know. That's a good question.
It seemed like Reggie's first raid anyway. He was struggling, but
Yeah. Reggie was in over his head, I think.
I heard an interview with Emily Blunt where she talked about how she interviewed 4 female FBI agents to prepare for the role, and they told her that it's very, very rare that you fire a weapon, right? Because they've been watching the house for weeks or months. They know where everybody is. They know everybody's routines. They have bugs planted. There should be no big surprises. I don't know if the film is written like that. That could be. The other thing that is very special about that scene, I think, is it looks like an action film at first, but then very quickly it changes, right? After the explosion, when they find something in the shed. And this is, I think, another thing that makes you go, okay, anything could happen at any moment, right? You think it's over, but it's not. So they want to keep the tension going. And then the way it's filmed, where they have like that shot pushing into the face of the guy in the wall with the plastic bag, and you see the hand on the ground. It's very horror-like. The vibe changes very quickly once the action is over. And I think that's another kind of like genre bending a little bit, where a normal thriller wouldn't do this. I think Denis is very good at holding shots longer than most directors to build the tension, which there are many examples of in this film. So that I kind of noticed that horror vibe in the early shots there.
Everyone's being sick in the background, and it sort of just lingers on them, just like doubled over.
German Shepherd running after the explosion, and all the little details, right? I think it builds a tension very well with just a few elements. And then after that, I think you start introducing Josh Brolin's character, Matt, and on the first watch, like, you have no idea what's going on. And basically when Kate talks to her partner and they ask, like, what's going on? I have no idea. Like, that could be the mission statement for a lot of the film for them, right? It's just no idea at all. On second watch, you realize, like, when they talk about, like, oh, they don't want the other guy because he's a lawyer, and then they ask her, are you married? Do you have kids? They're trying to figure out, like, okay, is she like a normal civilian that's not going to go along with this stuff? Or, like, do we have a chance of getting her to do her stuff, right? Because she's on the FBI and the kidnap response team. She doesn't do narcotics. She has no idea about any of this, right? They picked her specifically because she has no clue, which is kind of the opposite of what you would have in most of these types of action films, where the hero is just the expert and they know everything that's going on.
Especially with a Sheridan movie, often it's like, quite traditional plots. He's kind of not afraid to do, like, with Hell or High Water, he did that. It was pretty straightforward. But then you kind of get settled into Blunt as your kind of window in. And then when you go into that scene where Brolin's introduced, then all of a sudden, like, it blends into their voices through the noise-proof glass, where you're hearing but she can't hear. You're kind of getting a one up on her in a weird way straight away, and then obviously there's the dialogue was like, yeah, it's not in the file. Like she just seems to know nothing, so that they layer it on then as well.
Matt's flip-flops are a nice little marker of his character, right? You immediately know what kind of guy he is. Like the flip-flop was a nice touch.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say, like, I love in any film, like, I love good character introduction. Like Tarantino does it really well, and even like Sergio Leone and stuff used to do it. Like, yeah, a good character introduction is always such a highlight of a film. And here's with like the flip flops. I think he's wearing a t-shirt and everyone else is in suits. He's sort of like slouched right back on his seat. I think he's fiddling with something and he's like constantly smirking. He's just so clearly like on a completely different wavelength to everyone else there.
Different level of power then as well. It's a flex. He's like, you do, I don't have to. And I'm going to kind of rub it in a bit, yeah.
Yeah. Apparently Josh Brolin originally said no to the part because he was like, oh, this character's like, I think he'll come across as a bit like, apparently he read it and he was like, oh, this character's a bit of a gimmick. But like, I think his character, it's such an important, I mean, in terms of plot role, he's important, but his vibe, his sort of like smarmy, smirky, thinks he's better than everyone, always knows a bit more than everyone else there, so clearly operates above the rules, is the way he portrays that is so important to the film, I reckon.
Yeah, all the quiet scenes, even like in the motel rooms and stuff. He's the one kind of setting the vibe in all of those, and there's like a level of mirth in those ones where it could be dry and kind of slow, but he kind of keeps it going, yeah.
Conveying a backstory, right? Like, this is not his first rodeo, right? He's done that kind of stuff. Like, he has all kinds of information and he's plugged into all kinds of capabilities of the intelligence agency and all that the others don't have. And you can kind of feel that in his confidence. And the hotel, right? Opens the door like shirtless and just walks around. And like, this is just fun for him, right? This is just his comfort zone.
Yeah, he's like, oh yeah, today's going to be a good day before the raid. And he's sort of smiling and yeah. Actually, that reminds me, have you guys seen the sequel? The Day of the Soldado?
I haven't.
No, I heard about it, but I haven't seen it. I did.
Yeah, it's not directed by Villeneuve, so...
Yeah, it got pretty slated, I think.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either. For that reason, I didn't want it to sort of sully the original. It sounds like that, basically, because it didn't have Emily Blunt's character, did it? So it was just Alejandro and Matt.
It sounded like a more traditional film.
Yeah.
Back to what you mentioned about good character introductions. I think the same happens with Alejandro, right? The first time you see him is next to the jet. You see a side shot of him. He looks very cool, very calm. And apparently, they kind of built his character by removing stuff. In various interviews, they mentioned that they cut basically almost 90% of the dialogue that Alejandro was supposed to have. I couldn't have guessed it. He almost never speaks in the film, and to me, that's his character, right? It makes a ton of sense that he's keeping everything very close to the vest. I don't know, he's kind of a shadow, a ghost, right? That's the metaphor they use for him at one point.
There's a scene when he gets in the plane and Kate asks him his name and he doesn't answer. So then I was like, all right, are we ever going to find out? I don't think we do. I could be totally wrong there.
I think maybe Matt mentions it, but yeah.
Maybe he does. Yeah, because then I was like, all right, because I couldn't remember. I went back and checked the script, Sheridan script, and then it is like Kate says, oh, what's your name? He says, Alejandro. So obviously that was something that, if it was, they decided just to kind of kick it down the plot line a bit.
Yeah, apparently Del Toro was just like, for loads of lines, he'd be like, oh, I can say that with my face, I can say that with my face. On like Daniel Kaluuya's Reuben episode, he said like, he learned so much from acting with Del Toro, because everything Del Toro would be like, I don't need to say that, I don't need to say that. Which is why it's quite funny that one of the very few lines they do leave in for him was that like, you're asking me how a watch works, all we need to do is tell the time, which is like a cool line on paper, but it's also it's a very like movie line, isn't it? Like if someone said that to you in real life, you'd be a bit like, what the fuck, mate? Yeah. What does that mean?
Very Sheridan line, like really,
yeah. It worked for me. But yeah, it is a very kind of almost too cool line.
Yeah, exactly.
Another thing I thought was well done and effective, they set up the parallel storyline with the Mexican policeman, and you kind of see his family life and his work, and like on first viewing, right, you may not be too sure why they do that, but I think it makes the later scene in the tunnel so much more effective because it's not just some random NPC. And it was also a nice reminder that all this stuff, right, all the cartel violence and all that stuff has all kinds of collateral damage, right? Real people just trying to make a living and they get chewed out by this terrible war.
It serves as a counterpoint as well, because Matt and Alejandro are like giggling and laughing their way. It's like a big game to them at points. So then to kind of counterbalance that with those two, I think works as well.
Yeah, another kind of subversion is that at first you may watch this and think, oh, it's a good guy versus bad guy film, right? It's like, oh, the FBI are going to catch the cartel guys or something, and then not at all, right? It's like super morally questionable on all sides, and even if you're doing something for good reasons, if you do it like a certain way? Is it still good? Is it like you don't see everything, but there's so much torture implied, and there are no clear good guys here.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd say actually, like, watching it again this time, one, I'd forgotten, obviously I knew it was dark because of the subject matter, but I'd forgotten just quite how unrelentingly bleak it is as a film. And it's interesting that since releasing this, Villeneuve's gone straight sci-fi. I don't think he's done a non-sci-fi story since, I don't think. He's done Arrival, Blade Runner, and then Dune. I haven't quite worked out what I think about this yet, but then a part of me wonders whether the film doesn't always quite get the balance right between, like, being this really dark story, but also being, like, a cool film. Especially with, like, the night vision sequence, like, that's quite a cool sequence. And I definitely, when I watched it the first time, it was sort of like, oh, wow. I sometimes wonder whether it sort of treads that boundary right, or whether it sometimes leans too much on the latter at the expense of the former. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it is. It is very dark, right? When they go to Juarez, like the bridge scene, right? That's quite the image there. Villeneuve had been doing, like, Prisoners is extremely dark too.
Yeah.
The only film of his that I haven't seen is Polytechnique, one of his early French language films, because it's about a school shooting here in Quebec, where a guy basically went in, lined up all of the men on one side, the women on the other, and shot the women, right? And it's just,
Oh my gosh.
I haven't been able to watch it, right? I think he's been exploring very, very dark theme for a while. I kind of think it still works in that he doesn't, the violence scenes are kind of cool, but not too glorified. They're still pretty matter of fact, like they're still fairly like not purely documentary style, but quick and fairly realistic, kind of confusing. And that's a good question. Like, I think his intent was to keep it fairly realistic and not glorify it. But as soon as you have a bunch of people like in tactical gear walking around, and like it can't help but be kind of cool.
Yeah, it's not fist pumpy, as in it's not like a Michael Bay version where it's sort of like the intention is definitely there. I just sometimes wonder whether it completely pulls it off, or whether just because it's a product of such talented people with such striking visuals, it crosses the line. I haven't actually decided what I think about it, but that was just something that crossed my mind when I was watching it this time around.
Speaking of cool scenes, let's talk about the Beast, right? Well, another good example of how Kate is totally lost. She's an outsider. They're driving by a bunch of attack helicopters, right? You can see that this is not her world. They get in there and there's a bunch of badass Delta guys straight back from Afghanistan. This is serious stuff, right? This isn't just like, oh, let's do a normal law enforcement, like let's go pick up a guy out of prison, right? They have the marshals there, the big Texas guys with the big cowboy hats, and the Delta Force, and all of that is setting up what's coming. It's all building the tension so that when something happens, like the water is boiling by that point, right? And the line, when she asks, and he's like, nothing will make sense to your American ears, and you will doubt everything we do, and in the end, you will understand. That's another kind of mission statement for the film, right? Because as the viewer, nothing makes sense, and you doubt everything they do. At the end, you understand. You may not agree at all, but you kind of have to understand that if you're fighting people who don't play by any rules, the only way to strike back is to find someone who's not going to play by the rules.
Yeah, I love the cinematography on the drive towards the Beast. It's like a big, long aerial slow pans. It's almost like kind of anthropomorphizes the city. You're kind of like slowly getting near, and it's like a sprawling thing. And then you just got the drums, and then the helicopter kind of picks up with the drums as well. So it's kind of like,
Yeah.
what's the word? It's like the diegetic or something, when it's like the sound in the movie becomes like a kind of a prop as well. And it's all building up. And yeah, I thought that was class.
Yeah. Denis Villeneuve loves that. I was thinking he has a scene like that, and every single time he does it, I'm like, oh wow, that just is such an amazing like cinema experience. He did it in Prisoners, Sicario, Blade Runner, Arrival, and Dune, where he's got some slow pan over a landscape with dramatic music, revealing some striking thing on the other side of it. And like he could do that in every single one of his films until I die. And every time I'd be like, yeah, please give me more of that. It's so effective.
Yeah, somehow his aerial shots don't look like typical ones, right? They're just the ones that are shot straight down, and you see the desert at some weird angle. It looks like another planet. It's very, very unique, and it sets the mood that, I don't know, it feels like no place else somehow.
Is he flying forward in a helicopter and then slowly moving the camera back? Like things seem to be going at like a weird angle to themselves. Yeah, it's really strange.
And then more setting of the tension, right? The whole drive to Juarez, and at first Kate thought she was going to El Paso, right? She doesn't know anything, but they were going into Mexico. And the whole drive with the police escort from the Mexican police, and everybody has the face mask and the big 50 cal guns. And it's like, okay, like we thought this was serious with the Delta Force guys and everything, but now that wasn't enough, right? You see some armored vehicles on the side of the streets, like, okay, we're going into a war zone. And the music, everything is incredible at building tension. By the time you're stuck at the border crossing with the dogs barking, you're ready for anything, right? It's a hair trigger type of feeling for me.
Yeah, the music in this film is just crazy. Apparently, Denis Villeneuve said to the composer, he was like, "Oh, just give me like the sound of threat, just like give me the sound of threat." And like, I think he pointed him to like Jaws as like a sort of point of reference. And like, actually, you can actually really see the Jaws in like the do and that like going over and over again. It does feel a bit Jaws-like.
And there's like no melody or like musicality. It's like when all the migrants are kind of sitting around the buses, which we'll get to, and then at the very end, it's just kind of like hymnal kind of singing. But other than that, it's just basically two notes and drums.
Yeah.
In various variations of.
Yeah. It's very Hans Zimmer in a way, but it's more like stripped back than Hans Zimmer. It's like pure bass.
It's like if you give Hans Zimmer two notes.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's almost like weirdly industrial, but still kind of organic, right?
Yeah.
Like the heartbeat of a machine, kind of.
Yeah. Apparently, on Blade Runner, then this guy was supposed to do the score, and then Villeneuve was like, "Oh no, I want something closer to the original score." So then he got Hans Zimmer to do it. But then the score Hans Zimmer uses for the equivalent scene in Blade Runner, the flight to LAPD, where he's flying on the ship towards, it just sounds exactly like this one. so like Hans Zimmer displaced this guy and then took his score.
Another interesting choice, I thought, on the bridge scene while they're waiting, the camera shows you the other guys in the car with weapons, right? So that's not a surprise. The obvious thing to do would have been like, you don't know where it's coming from. But instead he shows us, and it's more about like how and when. That's the surprise. It's not who is it going to be or is it going to happen. Like we know it's going to happen. The tension has been building so much. You know it's going to happen. But even without that element of surprise, I think they still do an incredible job of the tension. And it's coming from all sides, right? And he keeps it very clear. I think like there's some aerial shots and you see like everybody dispersing on the bridge. And apparently all of the tactics used and how they handle their weapons and everything is very, very realistic. They used a bunch of consultants and they sweated the details there very much. And it does look very realistic. But then you still have some surprises, right? Kate almost gets shot from the back and it's so very well choreographed.
Yeah, it's a bit like Western-y when they're all pointing the guns at each other and there's just that like silence and I can't remember whether the soundtrack cuts out or not, but it feels like it goes on forever, that moment where they're just staring at each other down. And then like what you were saying earlier about how like when there is violence, it's like not glorified, it's like really quick and like it seems to just go on forever that they're staring each other down and then as soon as one of them shoots, like it's so quick.
Before they reach the bridge, Alejandro turns to him and I wrote down, it's like, keep an eye out for state police. They're not always the good guys.
Yeah.
And then that comes back again, post-bar, where it's like a state police from across the border then as well. And then obviously him saying that, considering we know what he actually is. So there's like three things going on that they all kind of percolate out.
Yeah.
Anyone could be a threat. Another quick shot. Right after all of the shooting, you see Josh Brolin's character. And he's still sitting in his vehicle. He's chewing gum. He's cool as a cucumber, right? This isn't his first rodeo. Like, he doesn't look fazed at all by all of this. I think that's another really character revealing moment for him.
Yeah, for sure. Another is a really quick little shot just before that scene, which I really like, is when there's the police cars like flying past, and then it cuts to some people playing. I think are they playing squash or are they playing basketball? Just two guys against a wall, and then like the camera sort of shows on them, then it sort of 360s round them, and then follows the police cars. A little bit of world building and showing that like there's people living there and this place is lived in.
Like when Kate's in the car before they reach the bridge again, she looks left and like there's a parallel street and she sees a cop car, and then it goes again, she looks left again and it's not there. Even that actually doesn't come back, but again it's just kind of keeping you kind of on tenterhooks kind of the whole scene.
Yeah, and showing the perspective of the civilians, right? So many films, right? There's I don't know, a James Bond film, and they're running through a city and firing at each other, and cars are jumping over bridges or whatever. It's like it's only a background for the action, but you kind of forget it's a real city with people. They don't really matter to the film. But in this film, I think there are all these little reminders, right? The parallel story with the policeman and his family, I think that's a strong one. Even how the film ends with the soccer game, right? Machine gun in the background, and they kind of all stop and is it coming closer? No? Okay, let's play soccer, right? Those little moments. It makes it sadder in a way because this is kind of based on real events, right? It's not purely fiction, but it has this layer to the film.
Yeah.
I was immediately kicked out because watching him, like were trying to play soccer. I was like, they couldn't have cast a kid who could actually kick a ball. It's like when you watch soccer on screen, it never works. I've never seen a movie where soccer works on screen for whatever reason.
Yeah, I should have called it football for you guys. Another big scene, I think, that reveals even more the character of Alejandro, the interrogation. So now they brought back the guy to the US. The physicality that Benicio del Toro plays it, right? When he walks around with the big jug of water and like just another day at the office, right, basically, and he gets in the room and he gets right in that guy's face, right? So inside of his personal space, and you don't even have to show him do anything, right? You know what he's capable of and how comfortable he is with this type of interrogation/torture situation.
That's the moment I think his protagonist arc kicks in, because you get a scene with him alone and then there's this suited Mexican guy as well. And he's like, at the end of it, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, what happened to you?
Yeah.
So then you're kind of like, all right, so there's like, something kicks into gear then. You're like, okay, why are they alone? And why are we watching them? And then what happened there?
Yeah. I didn't know Ghost got thirsty.
That final scene, they are putting down the gallon of water just next to the drain. They do loads of that throughout. Just like, it's all like the suggestion and it's not showing it as like you would in a Michael Bay where it's like, kapow, and then just kind of going through every motion. I think it just works so much better. Let the imagination do it.
Yeah. There's a shot as well just before that when they arrive, when before they go into the building and Emily Blunt comes out and starts shouting at Josh Brolin's character, and then he's being like, oh, you just need to watch and listen, and she's like really going at him, and like the camera sort of like is that like mid-distance, and you expect it's going to like go in or then do like a shot reverse shot thing, and it just sort of hangs there at the mid-distance just watching them argue, and then Josh Brolin's character like walks in, and Emily Blunt is what you were saying earlier about how like let the scenes go on longer a couple of seconds than you expect them to. And she's just sort of left standing there in this mid-distance shot, just like clearly just thinking like, where am I? Like, what is this world?
And very much an outsider, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the moment. And then he obviously becomes kind of, let's say, if he becomes a protagonist, 2 seconds later. In that scene then, I wrote it down, is she's like, why am I here? And Brolin's like, give us the opportunity to shake the tree and create chaos.
Yeah.
So she's just there. He's literally just said that you're a pawn, basically. And then things kind of, it's like a fulcrum then, and then things begin to switch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember if it's exactly that scene around then, but they also talk about, why are you doing this? And it's like, every day by his hand or his blessing, people are killed or kidnapped. Finding him would be like finding a vaccine. You can see the value in that, right? They're trying to be like, we're doing all of this because the stakes are so high. This bad guy is so bad that like, basically the ends justify the means. We're justified in doing almost anything, right? There's a line later in the film, what you fear is operating out of bounds. I assure you, you are not. The boundary has been moved. It's really like, they are the law, basically.
Yeah. I was thinking about that scene quite a lot, actually, because at first I was quite surprised because, like, I was thinking, oh, well, how does that affect Emily Blunt's character's conflict then? If she knows that what she's doing isn't outside the rules, then does that sort of somehow assuage her, or does that make her conflict sort of less dramatic or whatever? And I was thinking, actually, no, it probably does the opposite, because, like, I feel like her character throughout is trying to almost, like, hide behind procedure, and it's like, okay, if it's within procedure then it's okay, and if it's not in procedure then it's not okay, which is why she keeps on saying like, Alejandro's not authorized to boss me around, or like she's like very much shown as someone who's following the book, and then by her superior saying, no, okay, whatever you do, it's within the rules, that suddenly means like her moral compass has to actually come into play even more. It's like, I can't hide behind the rules, am I okay with what's happening or not, which then makes things increasingly difficult for her as it goes on.
Yeah, and also someone can say that the boundary has been moved, right? But does that mean anything? Is it true? Does he have that authority, right? Who's that guy, right? Over time, she figures out he's CIA, but then CIA can't operate in the US. And that's kind of the reveal later, right? The only reason they picked her is because she has no clue, and CIA can't operate in the US without being tied up to a domestic agency like the FBI. That's all she is, right? She's a checkbox, basically, for that mission. I don't want to jump around too much, but before the tunnel, right? All the Delta guys are like, keep your safeties on, point your guns to the ground, don't shoot any of my team, right? They're like, we don't need you. We don't want you here.
It's like, it's literally, it's lawless within the law. And then obviously then you have like, okay, which cartel is right? Okay, and then on the Mexican border, you're okay to do certain things on the American side of the border, but not the Mexican side of the border, and vice versa. And then on the Mexican side of the border, cartel and police are also intermingling. So there's like, it's like an undefinable shape about like, it's not like, A versus B. There's like, it's like things coming from up, down, left, right, diagonal, sideways. It's just unclear.
Even the image of the Mexican policeman like loading up tons of drugs in his police car and like driving off in the storm, right? And that image is really a huge metaphor. The next big scene, I think, is when she goes in the bank, right? That's a point where she reverts to her kind of like her nature as an FBI agent. She's like, I want to build a case. I want to find some evidence. I want to put people behind bar. She doesn't understand yet what they're doing, right? She doesn't know that this is all going somewhere else. So she's like, we got to build a case. And they warn her not to go in the bank. And I think in a lesser movie, you would have seen her in the bank, and then you would have seen like a shot of some cartel guy watching a recording of her, and then they look. No, all that Denis does is like show you the camera on the ceiling, and that's it. And you understand, like she just fucked up, right? She showed her face on film at a bank that's partnering with the cartels. This leads to the bone-chilling scene where the local cop, right? They meet at the bar and like they dance, and he's kind of an acquaintance or maybe a friend of her partner, right? So they end up in their apartment. She notices the rubber bands, right, that are the same. And so the story is all told visually, but by the time he's like choking her and going like shh, 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 then I don't know, that's very effective, right? We've all seen all kinds of scenes of violence like that, but I thought this was very, very like, I had a chill going down my spine watching that.
Yeah, so it's horrible to watch, and like the reveal when he empties his pockets and then he put the band, and that reveal when the camera sort of puts that in focus, and then her face, and it's like that's such a like, oh my god. Well, this is one thing I couldn't quite work out. What are those bands? Are they like, oh, I'm a member of the cartel, like a sort of membership? I couldn't quite work out what those bands actually like, what they were.
The way I interpreted it is just that in the money they seized, they were used. And so that guy had been paid off from one of those mules carrying the money, right? He's one of the policemen on the payroll, yeah.
Ah, okay.
One thing I didn't get was, so she shows her face in the bank, and then she's very quickly in the bar. So how has the guy organized this date for her, and how is they just found out who she was just in the bank, and then all of a sudden there's managed to be like a corrupt policeman has managed to befriend her friend and kind of get himself invited to the bar.
The way I read it is there may have been more time in between the bank and the bar than we see in the film. They kind of jumped ahead a bit. I suspect that after they got the money confiscated, like someone from the cartel just called their law enforcement friend and were like, go watch some of the films and do you recognize who that is, right? And one of them like, oh yeah, I know her partner. Followed the car and they saw they went to the bar and that's where he did that. But yeah, they kind of skipped some steps. That's how I fill it in. Maybe it doesn't work as well as that, but I kind of saw that as like they have informants planted into all kinds of police there. And inside of a police force operating in an area, like people know each other, right? It's the same people over and over again, right? And especially doing narcotics and these types of raids, it's probably not a big number of people.
Yeah. Poor Reggie, I mean, that's his only actual contribution to the plot, really, is introducing her to that guy, isn't it?
Great job.
I mean, yeah, other than that, he's sort of just, I suppose he's a moral compass, but plot-wise, he's just sort of there, drives him around a bit. So yeah, so it's not a great few weeks for him.
Well, thankfully, Alejandro was the savior there, right? He had been following her, and you could see him watch her before, but the first time you see it, you don't know why, right? A bit of misdirection, like you're wondering, okay, is Alejandro now going to do something to Kate? But no, he saves her with the psst, the gun into Kate's face.
When do you see her watching her? I missed that.
When she's leaving the station, and you see that he's in the car in the parking lot, and he sees her leave.
Okay, yeah, I missed that. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then she's like, you use me as bait. And they're like, no, you use yourself as bait. We told you not to go in the bank, right? It's all your fault, basically. It's like, we're not going to protect you, but now that you did this, well, it's ususeful to us.
So you get the sense that the moment she because he only kind of half-heartedly says, don't go into the bank. So like the moment she's gone, he's like, all right, now the bait plan is happening, like almost in real time.
Yeah. Now we got to watch her because something's going to happen.
Yeah. This is jumping ahead slightly, but one other thing on that scene is I read somewhere that after they come out the tunnel, when she tries to attack Matt, and Matt then sort of pushes her to the ground. Apparently the words he says to her then are the same as what Jon Bernthal's character is or something, and it's sort of shot in the same way. And so it's obviously very clearly meant to evoke that, like, she's just being, like, basically mistreated by these men, and it's sort of trying to draw a comparison between what they're doing institutionally to her to what Jon Bernthal's character was doing to her.
We can go to the tunnel, right? That shot of the guys walking towards the darkness with the night vision goggles on, with the sun having set and all that, that's one of the most beautiful shots I've ever seen. I don't know if it resonates with others the way it does to me, but every time I see that scene and like the whole metaphor of like going down in the darkness and the way the colors and the way it's shot and the diagonal across, and beautiful shot, I love it.
From within the cave, and you just see it's like one black thing just kind of comes into focus and then leaves. You can barely make out what's happening, but yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, and as you said, the fact it's not just like sort of screensaver cinematography. Like, it's a beautiful image. Yeah, there's obviously, it's like they're descending into darkness, and it has a storytelling purpose as well as just being like a really cool image.
Yeah, it's murky. It's not too sharp, which I like. You're struggling to kind of make out what's what, which makes it way more effective. I promise that I was like leaning forward, like I was watching it here, so like I'm kind of sitting up, but I kept like just putting myself back. I was like a 45-degree angle about 3 or 4 times throughout it.
Yeah, and I like how they shot the night stuff, right? Because a lot of films, they kind of, you have to pretend that it's dark, right? But you kind of see that they shot with light and then they did something. But here, they got a real night vision camera, because there are two things. There are the IR goggles and the night vision stuff. And they got a real one, and they really shot in the dark, which gives a very, very different feeling than most of these types of scenes. In a podcast, they mentioned like at one point Kate bumps her head in the tunnel, and they kept it, right? That wasn't scripted, but it does feel real, right?
I was wondering that. I saw that head bump and I was thinking, was that part of the script or not? So it wasn't, was it? That was something that they just left in?
Yeah, it wasn't. And the confusion, right? In a lot of the film, they're pretty good at, like the British scene, they're good at like giving you some aerial shots and wide shots, and you can kind of see where everybody is. In the tunnels, I think it's the opposite, right? They want you confused. Who's running where? What's going? How long is this thing? It's like total chaos, and I think it works. You feel just as disoriented as Kate would be, and that's why she ends up in the wrong side of the tunnel too, probably.
Yeah, it's just kind of like Blair Witch, where you're kind of just like, you're kind of always looking left and right with her. But I think, because we're meant to be kind of looking through her eyes, so we only kind of ever see as far, except in parts, we see as far as she does. So they actually properly do that in the tunnel. Like the first two throat cuts, you just hear it, and then it's like 3 or 4 seconds, and then you see the kind of luminous outline of the body with the night vision. And then all the initial gunshots, you don't see anything at the beginning as well, and then you kind of arrive at it. Which again, in a different movie, you'd be just getting like a close-up straight away of like someone lining up a sniper type thing, but no, not here.
Yeah, you're right. It's more about what you can't see than what you can see, and the infrared footsteps on the floor, like one by one, leading up to that body, and it's like, yeah.
And this is a big turning point in the film, right? So you see Alejandro come out the other side of the tunnel, shoots a guy, like at gunpoint, kidnaps the policeman and gets his car, and then Kate comes in, and she's in law enforcement mode, right? She's like, she sees the gun on the floor, like you shot someone, and she points the gun at Alejandro. And the first thing he does is he shoots her. The first time I saw the film, that was very shocking. Like, okay, he knew she had a vest on and everything, but it's still like, we're not friends here, right? You've been useful to what I was trying to do so far. He saved her life in the apartment, but this isn't that type of relationship.
Yeah, exactly. Like the film's like, it's just given you enough to think that they're forming like not like a romantic bond, but they like, because he says to her like, oh, you remind me of someone who was very dear to me or something, and like he sort of asks her how her neck was the morning after, and you just start to think, okay, they're building this
partnership or friendship or something deeper, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So then when the gunshots come, you're like, oh wow, this is not what I thought was going to happen.
I've seen Kate's character described as a decoy protagonist, because the whole film you're following her and you think it's her, but she doesn't move the story that much. And then from that point on, it's really Alejandro's story, right? That's the big culmination of everything. And you realize that everything else has been built around him to allow him to get to Fausto's house. They have drones in the air, there's aerial surveillance. This is a huge deployment of resources from the US. Like even like they fly around on private jets, they go on military bases, they have Delta Force. All these resources are just so that one person can get across after they do enough. Like they shake the tree and someone is recalled home, they can follow him, figure out where, get in the house. Like all of that has been just so this guy could do this. And the first time you watch it, it doesn't make sense until the very end. But as you rewatch it, like you see all of the pieces being put into place.
I was kind of thinking in my head, it's like it's a straightforward vengeance story, with the Medellin in Colombia, and it goes straight to Faustos. So it's a straight A to B vengeance story, and then we just arrive in the middle of it as like a different, just as one of the side characters, and then we're trying to figure out how we go on. But like it's a conventional story, but then we kind of just come in at Kate's position, because obviously Alejandro's been just doing the thing. He's just gone from Colombia to Mexico to kill this guy. So there's also like a really straightforward story there as well.
Yeah. But one layer that's added is, I think it's Matt that tells Kate outside of the tunnel, I think, when she asks something like, oh yeah, who's Alejandro working for? And he says like, he worked for anyone who will point him at the people who cut off his wife's head and threw his daughter in a vat of acid, right? Which is fucking horrifying to even think about. So then if Alejandro was like a Colombian cartel guy, was in a power struggle with the Mexicans, and he tried to kill them for like, I don't know, that would have been a very impersonal story, right? Like a bunch of cartels trying to dominate it. That would have made sense, right? But now it's so personal. Alejandro is using all of this machine of government and everything, but at the end of the day, it's purely a revenge, but it's a Inigo Montoya moment.
No, absolutely, because there is two storylines that just
Yep.
they intersect on basically on that plane. I'd love to know how his A to B, how he wrote the story. Like, did he just begin with Kate? Did Alejandro exist? Was it vice versa? I'd love to know that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think all the interesting ideas in the film come from Kate. It's almost like Alejandro's like the plot protagonist in the sense that like he incites the action. But like the part of the film that I find really interesting is like, this conflict between like, do the ends justify the means, and like the difference between what's morally right and what's sort of systematically right and stuff. And all that stuff comes from Kate's arc, even if it's plot-wise, she's a bit of a sort of onlooker.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of transposes. Like, she does all one plot, basically, just a story level, and then he does an action level kind of underneath.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to read the original script with 90% more of Alejandro dialogue, and maybe in some of that would be some of the answers to how he got there and more of his backstory and all of that. I think the film probably works better that way. And I don't think the fact that Kate is more of a witness than the protagonist, I don't think that's a weakness of the film. I think that makes the film better and more original and unique, right? I don't want the listener to think that I'm saying this is a bad thing. It's another subversion of the genre, which brings us to the Last Supper scene, right? The final scene. And I think the first time I saw that one was also like mind-blowing scene. And there again, I think Denis is not afraid of holding on shots a lot longer than others would. That scene seems to last a very, very long time the first time you see it. I'm curious how you reacted to it or what you think of it.
Oh, it's incredible. I noticed that throughout. I made note like 3 or 4 times. It's like the length of silence that he was letting in scenes, which I've watched a bit of Yellowstone over my dad's shoulder, but I couldn't do it because those lines where it's like don't ask about the clock, just focus on keeping the watching the time. Like Yellowstone seems to be like that's just like the dialogue is just those back and forth all the time. But in this, it's like the reason those kind of lines work, I think, is because there's so much space and silence left. Because again, so many scenes with Del Toro just kind of staring and just you're kind of waiting for him to say something, and then he's just a little nod, and then it goes back to Kate or whatever. But yeah, in that final scene, yeah, it's just kind of a masterclass in that.
A tiny little detail I noticed this time was that I think they start speaking in Spanish, and then Del Toro's like, "Do your family speak English?" And the guy's like, "No." So then they go to speaking in English, but then like, because this is just like raw emotion coming from Del Toro now, like very quickly they just switch back to Spanish, and before you even realised it's back to being subtitled, which is like a tiny little detail, but like sort of like implies that it shows that this is just like pure emotion now.
Yeah, it also gave Fausto the false hope that he was going to spare his family. Like, I don't want them to understand that they won't know what's going on. And at first he thinks Alejandro will only kill him. They mentioned that they shot 2 endings to the film, one with the family and one without, because the studio was a bit like shaky on that decision. But it makes sense with the character that he would have done this, right? Because it's purely personal. His own family was not spared, and it's terrible, but you see how someone like Fausto could compartmentalize his life, right? On one side, he's the guy like hanging dismembered people from bridges and all these bodies in the houses and kidnappings and creating a war zone over a whole city and a whole country, basically. And on the other, he has this beautiful house and beautiful family and eating his nice supper, like relaxing at home protected by armed guards. And this is another great contrast.
Yeah, what made that scene for me, it's almost like a little double reversal where he goes, just not in front of my family. So then you're wondering, okay, is Alejandro going to shoot him in front of his family, or will he take him away and shoot him? And then he just shoots the family.
So he didn't die in front of his family. His family was gone by then, right? It's like,
exactly.
Technically
so
you got what you wanted.
Yeah, it makes you asking the wrong question. You kind of, it almost implies that the family's going to be spared. Like, can you just do this away from them?
Yeah.
And then just kills them first, which is also well.
Yeah, I think if he just killed the boss, it would have veered a bit close to being like maybe a bit too much moral clarity, as in the whole film is that there's no good guys here and everyone is so morally compromised. At the end it doesn't hold back in being like Alejandro is, he's as involved in this.
Broken.
Yeah. He is not, okay, he might be a protagonist in plot terms, in terms of he's driving the plot forward, but like there's no sort of moral redemption for him here whatsoever.
Yeah, it's the whole like, can you fight monsters without becoming a monster yourself kind of dilemma.
You need Nietzsche, stare into the abyss,
The abyss stares into you. The next scene is kind of the epilogue at Kate's apartment. And I like how this was done. So she's on the balcony and it's very subtle. I think it's the first time I noticed it, and like on my fourth viewing, but she turns around because the nature of the sound coming from her patio door changes. So someone got into her apartment, and by opening the door, the sound changes on the other side. And that's what she notices. And so it's super subtle. And then she goes, and Alejandro is there, right? He wants her to sign a piece of paper. This says that we did everything by the book. Points her own gun at her head. If you don't, you would be committing suicide, right? Totally confirming that Kate was just a tool for him to get to do what he wanted to do, right? You may say, oh, you remind me of my daughter or my wife or whatever, but like, I don't think he would hesitate very much if she tried to do something.
I had a very, very slightly different read on that, which is tying into how the whole film is so morally uncertain, like intentionally, is that I wasn't sure whether actually he was pointing the gun at her to try and assuage her of any moral culpability for signing the form. He was basically saying, look, it's suicide. You don't have a choice here. So in a way, he was almost doing it in a really perverted way from a position of what he deems as kindness. He's like, you're not a wolf. Even if he wasn't going to shoot, I'm going to take the moral...
It's not a moral decision for you, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. I don't know if that is what's happening. That's like another read of it.
That's clever. That would make sense. If he was giving her an out by saying like, oh, I didn't want to, but he had a gun to my head, then that nullifies the paper, right? The paper's not going to work. So I think he still wants her not to talk about it. And it's like, oh no, I'll come back, right? Also.
Yeah.
But the way he does it, right? He's not like screaming at her or threatening or anything. He's just like kind of getting close and like matter of fact. And it's even more chilling that way.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Because he walks in and says, you look like a little girl when you're scared.
Yeah, it's horrible.
She's like regressed to like an infant in that scene,
Yeah, I think the way it was written, there was supposed to be more stuff in the scene where I think like he lifts part of her shirt and you see all of her bruises and how she's beaten up. And there was more stuff where it was kind of like threatening and like kind of like, and I think it's Emily Blunt that said like, you don't need any of that, right? You'll see it in my face, what I'm thinking. And just him being there is plenty enough or something like that. And they kept it more subdued, but I think it's even more chilling, right?
Yeah. Josh Brolin's character is so sort of a scene stealer because he's so sort of smarmy, and obviously Benicio del Toro is a sort of mysterious. You sort of forget Emily Blunt is so fucking good in this film. Like she just absolutely carries it. Like I'm not surprised that I haven't seen it, so maybe the reviews are unfair, but I'm not surprised the sequel was less well received without her in it, because her character is so important to making this film work, and all her like nervous little glances and the way she's still like presenting herself as strong but like slightly losing it over the film. I think she does it so well. I think it's like definitely her best. I don't know, of the films I've seen her in, it's definitely my favourite of her performances.
I think she's great. So Alejandro like puts her gun apart, throws the pieces, and walks out. She runs, she puts her gun back together, and she has him in the crosshairs from the balcony. And what does Alejandro do when he sees that? He turns around to give her the biggest target possible, right? He's not trying to hide or run or something, and he waits. And like it's like the stare is like, I know you won't do it. Like you can't do it. That's not you, right? He's like almost taunting her that you want to shoot me, like here I am, but you're not a wolf, right? And there's so much character moments and character development in this film that is totally silent and without dialogue. And I think that's another just great little parting gift at the end. That's
good, because the moment he left all of the gun parts right in the kitchen, I was like, what the fuck are you doing? Just can I at least keep the bullets or something? Like, it seems kind of mad just a little on a table for her. But that kind of plays into his confidence that she wouldn't do it regardless. So that kind of works even on that level.
So my read of the very final scene, the football, was them telling us that it had all been for nothing, and that like the ends didn't justify the means in the end because nothing has changed on the ground. That was what I took that to represent, but I don't know whether that was too clear cut.
I was just watching the technique.
Just watching the
football. I just saw it as a moment in life of the people around the story, right? Like, You can be all excited about like the big SUVs driving fast at the borders and the Delta guys and all that, but like there's people trying to live just next door to all of that violence, right? That I saw it at that level, but I also think like all of that, but now it's just someone different in charge. It's not gone away, right?
I saw it's kind of like, because their kids is kind of future looking. It's like, this is like, it's just going to be exactly the same, and this is just going to happen again. Like they're just going to grow into this, yeah.
It's not an upper movie, let's say.
It's not a Christmas movie, no.
Yeah, that's Die Hard. But any final thoughts? Anything we forgot to mention? Any aspects of it that you really liked?
Where would you guys rank it? How would you rank Villeneuve's films?
That's hard. That's really hard. How would you do it, Lay? I'll turn the tables on you while I think.
I love Blade Runner 2049. I think that's my number one. I think this is number two. Arrival 3. Dune 4. Enemy 5. Prisoner 6. I haven't seen On Sunday.
It's too hard, right? I can't, like,
Yeah.
Prisoner 6, right? That would be the number one film for many directors, but
Yeah, I mean, Prisoners is... I've seen it once and I've got no real interest in watching Prisoners again. As it is a well-made movie, but it's... Oh my God, it's so...
it's rough, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you have kids, I think it's even worse.
Yeah, I can imagine.
How about you, Dylan? Or I don't know if you've seen them all, or if you have a top three.
I haven't seen Blade Runner 49. I haven't seen Dune. I'd probably put Prisoners 3, Arrival 2, and this one. I think this was better than Arrival for me. Yeah.
Oh, but now you got to see Blade Runner. I can't do it, right? I can't rank them, but Blade Runner, I really loved it. It's like, it's so rare to see a good sci-fi film that's also a good film. Like, that's also not just a sci-fi film, but just purely a good film. And I think that was it for me. So many memorable scenes and images in Blade Runner, and like that may be number one, but I don't know. How can I rank the others, right? Too hard for me, but Sicario is up
Desert
there.
Island, you can take 3.
Probably Blade Runner, Sicario, and maybe Arrival. But we'll see. When Dune Part 2 is out, I think that's kind of like, we don't know how good that one is yet because it's not done. I really like Dune 2. I like them all, right? And Insanzi is also very good. It's another gut punch of a film. As we said, right, he's explored very, very dark themes, very personal tragedies in his films. That's more of that. Like, you kind of have to be in the right mood to see it, but I also recommend it.
Yeah. Some people who don't like Villeneuve say it's like that he's like a really like cold and like sort of clinical filmmaker, which I feel like is sort of true in a way, but I like really connect. I really connect with that, and like I just feel like he's a cold and clinical.
Surprise me.
But he's cold and clinical, but it's like he's so atmospheric, and like dialogue's really not his strong point, but his way of treating that is just to minimize on dialogue and like maximize an atmosphere, and like I feel like either you like connect with that on like a guttural level or you don't, and I can understand why some people don't, but like I definitely do. Whereas I feel like someone like Nolan, who's probably is like most, I don't know, probably his closest comparison of like people today, I feel like his weakness is also dialogue, but he compensates for it by going in on like exposition. Like I feel like when he's turned his weakness into a strength, whereas Nolan sort of, I love Nolan for lots of other ways, but like, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to compare. It's really hard. Like, Nolan has very, very high peaks, but some of his flaws, when they come out, to me, are very big. Like, Tenet is not the film I liked much, right, for example.
There's a Tenet renaissance at the moment. I'm back in on Tenet.
I know, like, Jim is big into Tenet. Everybody's like, there's the backlash to the backlash, I guess.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch it. Like, it's having a bit of a renaissance, I think.
All right. I hope the listener, after listening to this, wants to rewatch it again and will notice all kinds of new stuff. This is the fun of these types of films. I think they have layers. They have all kinds of cool details. It's like those books that you read and you finish it and you can reread it again and see it all differently, right? Like Ian Banks' use of weapons or some of these things. Thank you so much, guys, for doing this. This was a lot of fun. We didn't know which films we would do, but I was due for a Sicario rewatch. So thank you for following me there and doing your own.
Yeah, no, thank you. It was good fun.
Thank you. It was great.
Do it again.
All right. Bye-bye.